And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter today, January 20th. And that issue that matters today here at CR Podcast is not the Gaza Peace Board or Greenland, but our very own Greenland, our pastures, our farms, our ranches. Food security. Why are beef prices so high? Why do we have an endless shrinkage of ranchers exiting the farming business, exiting the food business, the consolidation of corporate farms, corporate monopoly of meat processors, inflation driven land appreciation that basically drives out all of our ranchers that, by the way, are our greatest voters from the business so we could replace the land with solar farms, wind, and data centers. Government steering capital to data centers instead of ranches and farms, promoting transhumanist cloud based surveillance and digital slop instead of cheap, healthy, abundant food and protein. Or we could just distract with Greenland while we have our own Greenland. You know, Trump's in Europe today, basically threatening France with a 200% tariff for not joining Trump's peace board for governing Gaza. Look, I don't like the French, but I don't know why that's our hill to die on. And then Trump is suggesting a military takeover of Greenland because Norway refused to give him the Nobel Prize. I just don't understand this. But all I could tell you folks is the future of food security is what matters. So we're going to have a special guest, a rancher from Texas, coming up momentarily. First, I just want to set the table today for what we shouldn't be using our land for, and then what we should be using it for. First, of course, like and subscribe our page here at Harwitz Show on YouTube. For those of you who are listening on iTunes, we do have the full show available with clips cut from YouTube so we can get through the algorithms. And of course, subscribe to my Substack at Daniel Horowitz on Substack. It's called Liberating Truths. And it's quite liberating. It's quite liberating here when you don't have to carry water for any one entity. And, you know, at its core, this agenda of the transhumanists was to take land out of service to use for human needs and now use it for the cloud. And we should be opposing this with every fiber of our being. We should be pushing for a Manhattan Project for cheap and abundant food, for more ranchers, more farmers, more utilization of the land to produce American made beef rather than cloud based AI slop that's actually now about to pop as a bubble and is not really getting us anything. Data centers is the new green energy. And that's what I want to start out with today. You have to understand that the left is never dogmatic about their tactics, just their goals. In other words, they want to control us. They want to make sure we own nothing, are dependent on government, crush small business, ranchers, put our lives on the cloud. They don't care how they do this. Okay, they're very pragmatic about that. So, in other words, I want to, and I think I've said this before, but I want to accentuate one of my observations that I think it's important you guys recognize. For as long as we could remember, they've been pushing green energy. And I'm not saying it's completely dead, but they recognize that they need a new tactic because you can't tell people we're going to take away all your energy. There's no energy. It doesn't work. Instead, what they're doing is they're jujitsuing our desire for functional energy, a different tactic, but to the same goal of owning nothing. So rather than saying, oh, we don't want fossil fuels, they'll say, oh, for sure, we need fossil fuels. We need it for productivity. But you know what? It's going to power the data centers. So they get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to jujitsu our support for fossil fuels into building their surveillance, transhumanist, cloud, and shitification of the internet state so that they're even more likely to succeed. And part of what you're seeing this week in Davos at the World Economic Forum is this in particular, jujitsuing our support for fossil fuels and moving away from green energy, but in general, co-opting this populism rather than openly being adversarial to conservatives. They're saying, you know what? Actually, we'll embrace what you guys want in their way. And of course, when it's populism, populism is meaningless, and the right doesn't even know what it believes. So basically, the left is conquering us in our own houses because we don't know what we even want. Here's a description from Semaphore to what's going on at Davos. Quote, as populism surged, it sometimes seemed like the only people having any fun here in Davos were the right-wing provocateurs, while liberal politicians stayed away to avoid a toxic association with bug-eating globalist elites. Anti-establishment figures relished the conflict. Javier Milei showed up in 2024. Heritage Foundation's Kevin Roberts bragged he told the old elites their time is up. But Davos has now jumped on the bandwagon. The progressive lingo of the years past is gone. Fossil fuels are back. Companies from McKinsey to Pfizer have bought expensive branding on USA House, a private operation with the State Department's blessing. It turns out Trump's brand of populism doesn't mean he can't enjoy a good globalist finance boondoggle. And folks, that is a perfect encapsulation and characterization of what is going on with the Trump administration's synergy with big tech, with Davos. They figure they'll just co-opt our stuff. And now, rather than having the right yell at what they're doing, they'll have the right walk the ball into their end zone for them on data centers, on the cloud stuff, on taking away farmland, you name it. We're basically just serving as useful idiots for them now. And by the way, this ties into another theme that I've been pushing, which is why rather than censoring the right, they're now allowing the right to earn a ton of money off of the algorithms, look like a bunch of fools and turn off swing voters, but at the same time, make them all happy and merry and drunk on their political fentanyl. Hey, go make your money. We'll help you with ad revenue. We'll earn money off of it too. While they continue marching the ball down the field on law and policy and civilization and culture, where we have no men on the field because they're too busy TikToking and tweeting. So I want to play a couple of clips here for you from Davos that demonstrate what is going on, where these guys are headed. Remember, Larry Fink, now that Klaus Schwab is pretty much dead, so Larry Fink is kind of running the show, the BlackRock dude. Here is what he had to say about solar energy.
You're going to be short power. Short power. And to power these data companies, you cannot have just this intermittent power like wind and solar. You need dispatchable power because you can't turn off and on these data centers.
Notice the play here, folks. Okay? That's a big, big change. See, if they want us, if we're trying to power our stuff, well, they're going to want green energy. But they don't want green energy for their stuff. Their data centers. They know it doesn't work, so they want real energy, which is fine. The problem is they're going to siphon it all off for their cloud-based transhumanist and shitification of the internet, this AGI, rather than using it for more functional uses of AI that China is actually using it for. That is their game, and we should never, ever give into it. Then I want to play another clip from Larry Fink that he just made at, he just spoke at this stupid thing, where he himself is inveighing against the elites. Listen to this. It's hilarious.
Affected by what we talk about here will never come to this conference. That's the central tension of this forum. Davos is an elite gathering trying to shape a world that belongs to everyone. That is why this year's theme is the spirit of dialogue, because dialogue is the only way a room like this can earn the legitimacy to shape ideas for people who aren't in the room.
So look at that. Did he all of a sudden become like us and think like us? No, of course not. This is the fusion of Trump and Vance and big tech and Davos, where they understand. See, if you're a real conservative, you can't be co-opted. But populism is like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, even though it's antithetical to everything you said you supported before or opposed. So they're having us march this data center agenda into the end zone for them. And again, we're going to have our special guest, a rancher, coming up in 10 minutes here. I just wanted to give over to you what they want to use our land for rather than farming and ranching. So what is this data center agenda? Okay, what is it? Is it just about buildings? The other Larry Ellison of Oracle, who's knee deep in insolvent debt from this circle jerk finance of the data centers, he had something to say about that. Let's play clip 3 here.
Because you're right at the forefront of this revolution, what it means for what government should do in terms of its digital infrastructure, digital ID, data centers, and so on.
The first thing a country needs to do is to unify all of their data so it can be consumed and used by the AI model. You have to take all of your healthcare data, your diagnostic data, your electronic health records, your genomic data. The NHS in the UK has an incredible amount of population data, but it's fragmented. It's not easily accessible by these AI models. We have to take all of this data we have in our country and move it into a single, if you will, unified data platform. So we provide context. When we want to ask a question, we've provided that AI model with all the data they need to understand our country. So that's the big step. That's kind of the missing link. We need to unify all of the national data, put it into a database where it's easily consumable by the AI model, and then ask whatever question you like.
So notice, ask whatever question you like. It's all about asking questions, not about industrialization, mechanization, this AGI God. But how are they going to do it? By building data centers, because you only need data centers for cloud. You don't need it to do narrow, low latency, but highly efficient mechanization of seaports and farming and synergizing freight trains, things like that. That you don't need that. You can do that on a laptop. Okay, you need data centers to, for one thing, the surveillance cloud state. That's what they want. Imagine that, consuming all of our land, not for food, farming, ranching, but for cloud. That's what this is all about. It is all about the cloud. And so much so that they're actually now saying that they want to make sure. Larry Ellison has another clip that was from last year, by the way. It's a little bit old, but Larry Ellison, there's another clip I don't have here. I'm trying to dig it up, but if I can't find it, you could easily search it. He said that he doesn't want people owning personal computers anymore. Oh, you're all going to be on the cloud. Notice, you'll own nothing. Everything you do is reliant on big tech, and they will surveil you. We are literally digging our own grave with this administration pushing tax, regulatory, land zoning favors for them, trying to ban states from even having basic zoning, and when we need it for farming and ranching. So basically, data centers are now consuming 90% of memory chips. So not only are we losing water, power, food, land, quality of life for these Bale data centers, but also, according to the Wall Street Journal, 70% of all memory chips this year will be consumed by data centers. And you know what this means? It's going to exacerbate the RAM shortage in computers and all electronic devices, including cars, by the way. They're all going to become more expensive. Laptops, consoles, iPhones, obviously cars. oh, but the loss of the personal computer won't be a problem because Jeff Bezos wants people to turn in their computers and live on the cloud. Yeah, it's Jeff Bezos, by the way, not Ellison, but they both agree. And by the way, you know what happens when you turn in the cloud? It's a double whammy. Not only is the American big tech surveilling you and capturing everything you do, but it's the Chinese have already hacked it. So, that's with that. And this is basically where we are. They want to steal as much of our data as we can that they have to store in these massive power sucking dung holes. And then, so he box out all the farming and ranching. And then they've got our data and we have to give them more tax breaks so they can further just query these things with questions. You have to understand the failed financing model here, what it is. Data center loans make no sense without government helping them and misallocating capital to them. They're not sustainable. Most of the loans are non-amortizing loans. So what does that mean? The payments don't go towards reducing the amount owed. Instead, they're perpetually financing for what is assumed to be a perpetual asset. And that assumption is that at the end of the term of the loan, the whole balance will be refinanced. But the problem is that the chips degrade and become worthless after 3 to 5 years. So who will refinance an asset whose key component has fully depreciated? That's the biggest thing no one will tell you. So now you might ask me, so then what's their plan? Their plan is to have this AGI slop infiltrate every work process, even though we don't need it, and often it degrades it. But once you replace it, you make us dependent on it, and we have to use these chatbots, and the customer base can't avoid it. The world gets hooked on the generative AI, and then now they could collect their profit, and that's how it's profitable. One other thing before we get to our guest, watch out for the AI rope-a-dope. Okay, this is very important. That now what they're basically doing is they themselves, the industry themselves, they're writing bills to say, oh, big tech needs to pay for the utilities. Oh, we can't pass it on to the consumer. And Trump himself, suddenly after saying, you better not regulate, he was banning states from doing this. And now he's saying, yeah, don't worry. We're gonna make sure they don't pass on the buck to consumers because they realize people are rebelling against it. 41 data center projects were canceled just in the last 6 weeks alone because of the protests against them. The entire year or half a year from June last year on, only 15 were canceled. And now in the last 6 weeks, it's 41. So folks, things are changing rapidly. So now they're rope-a-doping and saying, don't worry, we'll write legislation. So they're writing these bills, but they're very vague. It's like, yeah, we're going to, make sure we don't pass it on to you. But that's ridiculous. If you double the demand, we simply don't have the power. We don't have the power lines. We don't have the generators. Someone's got to pay for it. And they don't have the capital now. So basically, here is what they're trying to do with this cloud stuff. From the beginning, it was always about hoarding all the data to train this super Zeus-like fake Baal god while funding it by addicting people to this digital fentanyl, this enshittification that does nothing for you other than AI slop. But they know that the US is the best place to do it because it has a viable location to cover the data centers with all the land. No other nation has this much free land, the power infrastructure, and the political elites who hate their people and are subversive enough at the leadership level in both parties to get the job done. And folks, that's just the way it is. So that's what they're trying to do using this nonsense. The misallocation of capital, investments, and land for digital fentanyl and the surveillance state. What should we be using land and capital for? What should every tool of government, I don't mean like socialism subsidizing, I mean getting out of the way of ranchers and farmers so that we have safe, healthy, abundant, cheap food and protein in this country. So, folks, our ranchers are some of our best Americans, steeped in rugged individualism, godly people, really our best base, but also they're producing something so vital. We absolutely need more healthy, cheap, and abundant protein, not more cloud data centers, dystopian nonsense, destroying our ranches and farms. We need a Manhattan Project for more farmland, more ranch land, and more ranchers. And not that we want government mollycoddling, just get rid of the government headwinds that are harming our ranching community. So, with us today is a guest that I feel covers the bases of all the parts of ranching, the actual ranching, meat processing, and ag financing. Cole Bolton, he's co founder of the Beef Initiative. We've had so many friends on the show before from there, advancing decentralized food systems, which is so critical, rancher sovereignty, and direct to consumer beef. Cole's a third generation cattle rancher from East Texas, where farms and ranches are getting overrun by this dystopian nonsense. He also once ran a meat processing facility. Plus, and this is his main focus now, he's chief lending officer at Frontier Bank of Texas, where he applies his knowledge of ag and commercial lending to help these farmers that are in distress from the misallocation of capital. You can follow him at K and C Cattle, and he's with us in person. Hey, Cole, welcome for the first time to Blaze Media.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me on today.
All right, I'm really excited to get into this because right now, as we're talking, beef has soared to a record $6.67 for a pound of ground beef. It's been up like 15% this year, 72% since COVID. Yet you guys have been struggling to earn a profit, are leaving the industry in droves, selling off land being gobbled up by bad players and bad stewards of our frontier. How does that equate?
Well, it's a great question. I actually had this conversation with someone this morning. What really caused these ground beef prices and just overall beef prices to soar is kind of the beginning point of that conversation. So it's been a perfect mixture of we're at 50 to 60 year lows in inventory of cattle. We've had, we're losing, I believe the data that I saw was 77 ranches per day right now. And what that's due to is it's due to pressures in real estate, access to capital. It's due to price fixing that we saw from the four largest packers. It's had to do with continual losses in profit year after year for ranchers. And now, with this lack of inventory, plus another sore subject is a lot of the technology that they're pushing onto ranchers through mandates of where the government is trying to push the cattle industry towards. It's created this perfect storm. And so with that shortage, we are seeing record prices. Now, ranchers, to our benefit, we are seeing record prices for our calf crops. But what a lot of folks don't realize, this is the first time a lot of these ranches in the last 12 months have had sustainable profitability, but it's really just making up multiple years of break evens or losses. And so, we want to see a balance, I think, from all sides of the equation. But subsidized food in the United States, when the average consumer spends less than 10% of their income on food because it's subsidized, has helped create, not just in the beef industry, it's just food as a whole in our country. The government has kept cheap, lower food and sources of food down. So now that we're seeing more market realism with pricing, a lot of folks are like, oh my God, food is just so high, but it's wholesome type food. It's nutrient dense food, specifically with beef versus pushing sugars and fake starches and whatnot through a food pyramid as a political scheme.
No, and we've definitely seen at least somewhat of an alleviation of the government misinformation with food and what is healthy. But obviously, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, although these things are pretty heavy, these cattle, is the low inventory. Is it what is driving the low inventory? Is it that ranchers are being driven out of the profession and that's why the inventory is low, or is the low inventory driving out cattle ranchers?
It's a perfect storm of several things. It started with COVID. A lot of us, obviously, you know, I'm going to speak from the corporate side of cattle ranching versus the direct to consumer side. On the corporate side of it, the bigger picture is when COVID hit, a lot of these ranchers lost a ton of money. The market crashed, these plants closed. And then you follow that up a couple years later, and we had record droughts, both in Texas, New Mexico was hit, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. So we were killing cows, mama cows, that in turn would be having calf crops. Well, that cycle just kept going. Well, then as these prices have gotten higher, we build our herds back through heifer retention. So we take a female cow that hasn't had a calf yet, and then we start her cycle of breeding. Well, with record prices, ranchers have been getting hit for years and years. When we see prices peak, our market typically doesn't just stabilize, it plummets. And ranchers have learned their lesson. And so what they're doing is they're selling the heifers that now are going into the food supply instead of being used to go back into our breeding programs and increase numbers. That also has to do with ranchers are exiting the industry because it's too much work for not enough return. The average age of a rancher in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 65 years old now.
Wow.
And young people aren't going into it. And then I have a very unique situation. Obviously, as a banker, I do own some real estate, but I work with developers because my hub, our ranch headquarters is on the outskirts of Austin. So I go in and work with developers while they're permitting and platting of whatever they're going to do. I'll go and keep ag exemption, cut hay, run cattle on their properties until they develop it. But me personally, I lost a huge production lease that I've had at 650 acres. I could run over 200 head of cows on it. And it's going to be now a data mining center. So
how does that happen?
What happens is for years, these multi-generational ranchers have held on and passed the land down to their kids. But now with inheritance taxes and quite frankly, consecutive losses, they see record amounts of income that they can get that's multi-generational. So they're selling off to these data centers.
So I'm a little bit confused. If we have this crisis that's already bad with record low inventory, and that's given that the average age is in the 60s, so you could imagine if we don't do anything now, the trajectory of this, and yet all of the tax breaks are going to the Mag 7 companies that already have all the capital accumulation from everything else government is doing with the monetary manipulation, the artificially low interest rates, and the federal pensions are all steered to these countries. So they have endless capital to then bid up the price of land, make it unaffordable. While you guys, you have to pay taxes on everything. Your cattle feed is a fortune now because of there's not enough growing of hay because of the conservation programs and other farm bill policies. Then you guys now have the record property taxes and inheritance taxes that these guys don't have to pay, but you're not cash wealthy. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out why you see this giant sucking sound from ranching to data centers.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it any better. And although I'm a multi-generational rancher, I didn't have land passed on to me. I'm one of the few that I had to find a creative way, which is why I work with real estate developers. It allowed me to extend my footprint with our cattle operation. And a lot of folks ask me, like, well, why do you want to go into ranching? It's what I love. It's what I was born. It's in my blood. And I would do it full time, but that is also why I'm in the banking industry. I needed a source of income to provide capital, because access to capital for most ranchers is a real struggle, and especially for young producers, we don't see them going in, and it's not just the workload. It merely has to come down to capital. So, as an example, this year I met with a group of guys on Thursday. Where normally they could operate on a $300,000 or $400,000 line of credit for cattle. This year they need $800,000 to $1 million, and their income hasn't significantly
Is that because of
changed.
land, feed?
It has a lot to do with cattle pricing just being higher. They're wanting to jump in and get into the industry. But this year, yeah, feed costs are a little cheaper actually right now, but everything is cyclical. Texas right now, we're going through a pretty good drought. New Mexico, or eastern New Mexico, is pretty dry. Parts of Oklahoma are. And, as much as I hate to see a storm coming this weekend, we're all supposed to get a bunch of possible snow, sleet, ice, who knows. At this point, we'll take any of it, because if it continues on this trajectory, we're going to be hitting a drought again while we're trying to rebuild the national herd. And if it doesn't, it's just going to further exacerbate the issue.
So look, the president has done some good things with the meat processing, some new regs, and I want to get into that. But in general, obviously, I don't see people like you cycling in and out of the White House. You see the Zuckerbergs, the Larry Ellisons, the Bill Gateses. It's all about, the data centers and big tech and the cloud. That's the big focus. So that's where government is signaling, and especially with the tax breaks and the zoning, the special zoning they want, is all for industrial data center use. If I would put the beef initiative in charge of our ag policy, what is the whole of government approach we could take with allocation of capital? And you're obviously in rural banking, that could help A, rebuild the herd, and B, make ranching more profitable for multi-generational ranchers to hold on to?
Well, I think step one, and this administration, specifically Donald Trump, in this aspect, he did do, a lot of ranchers were mad. Not even a month ago, they were pretty mad at the president because of some comments made about the beef industry. But one of the great things that he did do, that I commend him for, is we have a lobbying arm in the cattle industry called the NCBA, National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They do not represent the interest of a lot of the producers.
Not surprising.
We can't. There is a very large percentage of us that are very angry with them. So instead of letting these lobbyists come in, he did go and sit down with two really, really good producers. And so he took another opinion versus, a lobbying arm and corporate opinion. But where I'm going with that is, we first have to start with the processing. So, we have a monopoly, basically, without saying it, in the cattle industry. We have 4 major packers that dictate pricing on cattle. They've been hit with multiple lawsuits. We need to decentralize that. Bring, back in the 60s, people could go down to their local butcher shop and pick up meat or pork or chicken. And that whole industry pretty much has just shifted away and faded out. Not that there aren't some small local meat markets, but there's not very daggone many. And so allocating those funds towards going back and building communities. And we think first and foremost, that's where we have to start, is local. And when you can start with local communities, you're going to create local jobs. You're going to create local sustainability. There are certain things that these AI data centers aren't going to be able to do. As an example, when you have a sick animal, they can't go out and doctor an animal in the pasture. So, we've got to get young people to understand that this is a service industry, that we can't completely go technologically based. So there is going to be opportunity for jobs. We've got to get young people going back into it, and we've got to create commerce. We'll start with the small packing. We'll start with ranchers and making sure that we utilize and revitalize our land. most importantly, and conserve it in the way that it's supposed to be conserved, by rebuilding our soils. And I think, that is a great question you're asking me. I'm not answering it all because I have about a million different ideas that we've thrown around the table, but I think we all agree we've got to start on the
So
packaging
how
side.
do you deal with that? The big four, obviously the Brazilian brothers that are trying to now get in on the Venezuelan oil. Those guys, there's concerns about the safety of the food. Obviously, there's the ties to China. What is government doing to consolidate that power that it doesn't work the way you described in the 1960s, where we have these more local processing? How do we get that back where we have the direct to consumer processing at a local level?
Well, the first step the government did is the DOJ did start looking at antitrust issues amongst those four companies. That is a major step. Whether it goes anywhere, who knows? The next thing that we've got to do is get capital, either through, I'm not a big supporter of the USDA grant system. I think too much of agriculture has been subsidized.
Exactly.
I built a plant 4.5 years ago with my business partner, all out of pocket, and it was that was challenging. We made it successful, but we've got to get access to capital to build these smaller facilities. Unfortunately, right now, I can tell you from building one from the ground up, the costs are just so high, and it's such a big capital risk that a lot of banks are going to have an appetite for it. So we're probably going to have to get the government to do some loans directly for it until we can get banks comfortable and ease our market risk down.
Which they're doing for the data centers, which we already know they depreciate within 3 years, and it's not solvent. Here you're building a long-term national herd. So, I mean, that's obviously clear. Also, let's talk about the land. I mean, some of this is also you're getting wiped out by the general inflation. So the general inflation of all the inputs, and then the general inflation and the monetary policies that have all caused land appreciation. So that obviously hurts the ability of anyone to retain a farm. So you could have a 500-acre ranch and be earning $100,000 a year, but you then inherit it from your parents and you're hit with a massive bill. So obviously the death tax needs to be dealt with.
Absolutely. The death tax is exactly as it's described. It is a death tax. So many people in agriculture are never cash rich. They're typically all their equity is in real estate, and you're taking either their retirement completely away from them, or you're setting their kids up to completely walk away from the industry. As an example, where we're at, in some of the more rural areas outside of Austin, you go 40, 50 miles, you can still find some land, maybe priced at $6,000 to $10,000 an acre on the larger tracts. By the time you stock it with cattle, there's no way you can generate a net return. So what's happened is you have more producers. They're using agriculture more as a tax engine. So there are a lot of things that you can deduct through the agriculture industry, but they're doing that and basically keeping the ag exemption to cover the real estate tax on it. And then 10 is to take the payoff through the sale of land. And that is not what's going to rebuild our industry.
That's my concern, that the more we put incentives on data centers, the more it misdirects the capital there, the more it creates land appreciation, because now your land is potentially suitable for a data center. So just that alone, you're going to have to pay property tax on that unrealized, Zillow estimate, so to speak. And it just makes no sense, the balance of power. Let's talk a little bit about just the quality of, first of all, just explain to our listeners who don't know, what is a regenerative rancher and what sort of product are you offering that you feel is not being offered by the big four meat packing plant processing companies? And how does this tie into country of origin labeling?
Oh man, great question. So, um, you know, regenerative ranching it's a practice, it's a lifestyle choice in which we raise our animals without uh, pesticides, herbicides. We're trying to teach them, for the last 20 years, ranchers have looked at how much money can I make per pound on the cow, and we're having to take a different approach and really push more towards the farming side of it. How much money can I make per acre using my cow? So by doing that, we're letting them sort of live in these ecosystems and naturally manure on these pastures, rotate them, graze them heavy, and constantly rotate them so that we are building our soils, so that we are regenerating our grass and regenerating quality through natural nitrogen and different elements. Where we're different than what you're getting at the big four. First off, they typically, the labeling issue on the meat that you get is a whole scam in the first place. I can tell you from being in the meat industry. Getting to know your local rancher and understand what their practices are, what vaccines you use. Some people don't really give a crap, which is what you're getting when you buy from the big four. Some people are very cognizant of vaccines and don't want certain vaccines given to their animals, which you can do. There's this misconception a little bit about mRNA that's been going on. So a lot of folks thought that, hey, they're giving mRNA to all the cattle. Well, if they were to get it passed, it would be into a vaccine called IBR, where they give a modified live virus to this animal. The reason you have to give it is because you're bringing in thousands of animals from different climates into a feed yard. And so they bring all types of different disease, and it helps to protect against that. But when you're raising and doing regenerative, you're not bringing in outside herds. So the need for those vaccines is no longer really there. You can get away with that because you're keeping them in the same environment. It helps the natural quality. Most regenerative producers are grass-fed and grass-finished, meaning the animal stays on grass its entire life. I did a hybrid where we raise all our animals on grass their entire lives, but we do supplement. I work with local companies like our local breweries when they need to get rid of their spent brewer's grain. Instead of it going into the landfill, we take it and we mix it with alfalfa and build a little bit of a ration so that we can help during the cold winter months versus giving a straight grain. We make a ration with forage. And so we reuse all of our manure. We pretty much are completely self-sufficient with our ranch versus having to bring outside chemical and outside sources in.
Now, one of the big points of contention at the end of last year was obviously the president's plan to import from Argentina, a bunch of their beef. I've heard this idea before. Do you think it would be a better idea rather than importing, finished product to compete with our ranchers when they're crushed, to rather import their quality cattle to rebuild herds?
Yes, to an extent. There's a whole long issue that relates to quality. So we'll first address the Argentinian beef. But a lot of folks don't realize we were already importing about the same amount from Brazil. Although I'm not a fan of JBS and the practices of JBS and what they stand for, it was basically a wash. But the reason we're having to import beef is because our carcass size 40 years ago, we were taking a live animal that weighed 1,000 to 1,100 pounds. Now we're killing cattle weighing 1,450 to 1,500 pounds. And so our box size has increased. And with that, we have a lot more fat. Americans love marbling, but we're overfeeding some of these cows. So we have tons of fat that we got to do something with. Well, for years, all of a sudden now tallow has become a new thing. So, hey, we're being able to take some of the kidney fat, the back fat, and put it back into tallow. So in production to where it can be profitable. But we were buying lean beef from Central and South America to blend in with our fat trimmings in order to keep the ground beef cheaper. One of the easiest ways is let's reduce carcass sizes. Quit feeding cattle so long at the commercial level. That's why so many people that buy direct to consumer say, man, this is the best tasting beef I've ever had. I've never experienced it. It's because those animals are getting a dry age at a local meat locker for normally 10 to 14, 21 days. When an animal is going commercially to slaughter that you get at your grocery store, they were slaughtered, hung on a rail for 48 hours, then 48 to 72 hours, then they're processing out the door. So if you take a steak from a local rancher and you grill it and you weigh it before you put it on the grill against one that you got from a store, the one from the store is going to shrink. The one that you got from the rancher likely will not, because you've already had all the water weight loss in the dry aging process. Going back to what you're saying, if we'll shrink our carcass sizes down, we won't need as much lean trim. But they've looked at bringing in to help the dairy industry and start harvesting more of the dairy cows because for leanness. But actually, dairy cattle can have marbling too. Actually, they can grade really well if done correctly. So, there's not a perfect answer to that, but being able to utilize more and more parts of that cow is what's going to allow us to not have to import as much lean beef.
And that's what you're proposing. And then obviously, like you're saying, you're getting more with the steak, so you can't compare the pricing if you're obviously getting more there.
Yeah.
Look, there is a farm bill that is going. I mean, right now it's been on stopgap for a while, but they're going to do another 5-year farm bill. If I make you king for a day, what are some of the things you'd like to put in or take out?
Those that are in the farming industry would probably want to shoot me. I may get some heated threats over this. Let's start by getting rid of subsidies.
Yes.
But first there's a new mandate for RFID tags in cattle. As a producer, the large majority of us are firmly against them. It's supposed to be used for vaccine and health traceability. I'm not ignorant. It is for technology and tracking, but why give a tool to the big four monopoly so they can further dictate our pricing? So we would start there. We would, I would start dismantling within that farm bill how our big four, how they have to price. Honestly, I think we shouldn't be trading cattle on a futures board that can be manipulated by, I think Hillary Clinton in 1 year made 400,000 on commodities alone. Hillary's never even owned a cow in her life. But I think we look heavily there. We have a long list of things that I can present at any time of what I do with Farm Bill. But I think, making sure that we have representation actually from producers and not from trade associations, I think would make a huge impact.
Yeah.
It starts at the university levels. I think that they need to separate our leadership from, so much of what's represented are company or individuals that have worked for the larger corporate companies that are pushing chemicals, that are pushing drugs and whatnot. Sorry, when I say drugs, pharmaceuticals for animals. And so, we've got to really start dissecting and go back to as our CEO at the Beef Initiative says, the source of the seed, and put initiatives back for local producers. I don't know what that looks like. We've been shooting ideas on how we get people to do heifer retention to build the herd back. We've been talking about how we get, instead of doing subsidies, how do we encourage young farmers? And we have a ton of ideas, but I know I'm not giving you
you need a seat at the table. It's meaning the problem is all the politicians from the White House, the congressmen, whenever it comes time for ag policy, oh yeah, we're paying attention to the farmers and the ranchers. But what that means is the big corporate associations, that have created that I always say they've basically turned ag into what they turned healthcare into, which is a
Yes.
cesspool of leeches and middlemen and anti-market policies and monopolies where you don't have a decentralized process. So with that said, could you just sort of give a pitch about what is Beef Initiative about and how people could get involved and maybe benefit from it?
Yeah. So I helped co-found the Beef Initiative with the CEO, Texas Slim, in 2021. And, our tagline has always been go shake a rancher's hand. And what we're built behind is the premise that consumers need to go meet their local ranchers, understand where their food source is coming from. A big part of the farm bill you were asking me a while ago that I would be pushing on is agriculture education. Our kids, I learned this when I started my meat company in 2000, I think it was 17 or 18, how many young people still thought their steak came from the grocery store and had no clue that it came from a ranch. We are huge proponents of education, both on the health benefits of eating red meat, which had been pushed for so long as a negative on the food pyramid. RFK is doing a great job trying to change that. So we're headed the right direction there. Another part is educating about the practices and how to save soils. Even within the cattle industry, we have some of us that are adamant about regenerative and making sure that we save our land. And then we have others that have a commercial way that they want to run cattle. So we're trying to join both sets of ranchers together to be in the same vision. But
yeah, because someone like me, I don't have knowledge about that, the science behind that, and that gets to health and quality. But in terms of at least the pricing, I think what we could all agree upon is you cannot have government artificially steering capital towards other uses and abuses of land that's not natural, the green energy stuff, the data centers, the solar, and that sort of nonsense. You can't have this lying with country of origin. You can't have these monopolies created through government USDA regulations of meat processing that's designed to make it hard. I think we need to decentralize. States need to be given more authority to basically have their own certification and get more local beef to market quicker. I think these are the sort of consensus things. Obviously we got to regrow the herd. So through the Beef Initiative, are people able to find local farmers? They're like, look, I wanna find, good tasting, healthy stuff, especially the people that are becoming more conscious. Like, I don't want to put that garbage in my body. Well, if that garbage is put in your meat, it's coming in your body. So where could they get involved?
Okay. So you can go to beefmaps.com, and at beefmaps.com, you can actually find ranchers all across the country. Now, mind you, we do get some comments like, oh, you don't have enough in Arizona or Nevada. We've added hundreds of ranchers. But each day we're adding new and new producers. So you can go there and identify ranchers local to your area. We do have some headline ranchers that ship all across the country. One thing I would say to producers, there's some other ways too. We have the I Am Texas Slim Foundation, in which you can donate money for, we went in when they had the wildfires in the panhandle of Texas 2 years ago. We helped we sent the money, we helped reseed a bunch of the pasture land to try to get it back into production. When we had the flood in Texas, it just so happened in Texas,
Texas has really gotten hit.
We did. We sent beef. I personally sent beef to North Carolina for the hurricane a couple years ago. We sent pallets and pallets of beef up there. And so we're trying to help ranchers and consumers both in any disaster areas. You can go to the I Am Texas Slim Foundation and donate there. But with you asking that, one of the biggest things that come up for someone that's never been to the Beef Initiative or Beef Map site, when they look, they say, man, it sure does seem like buying direct is way more expensive. And that's, hey, I completely understand, because I've been in the meat processing.
At the moment, this is where we are.
It is where we're at, and pricing from a local rancher is going to cost more than at a grocery store, because right now the corporate packers are losing money. And And so are we, because we're having, where it costs, as an example, to kill a large cow and process it at a big four processing plant, their cost is about probably somewhere between $400 to $500. If I take a cow in to process so I can sell to you, my cost is about $1,100 to $1,200 for the same size animal comparative. So therefore, yes, it is. The more and more of these smaller plants we're able to get into, and the more and more jobs we're able to build and not support with illegal workers and that whole issue at hand. Naturally, you're going to see beef prices at the grocery store, if it's done correctly and not subsidized. They are going to be a little bit higher than our norm from 3 or 4 years ago. But then your ranchers will be able to fall closer in line and shorten that gap.
It's a long-term problem. We've ignored it. And that's what I like about you guys, that you're trying to be realistic, taking a vital problem. We all said we want real jobs, real land use, people over digital. Well, this is literally the contrast that you cannot get starker. Are you going to use your land for farming and ranching, or are you going to use it for this dystopian AI slop chatbot querying cloud surveillance? And it's that simple. And you're getting together, trying to coalesce those that are still in ranching before we lose a generation of education, know-how, and desire to even get into it. I mean, this is literally about putting humans first, and you got to do it. So beefmaps.com is the place to go. Cole, there's so much I can get into, but we're out of time. We'd like to have you back again. God bless you for this venture, and thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, sir. Yeah.
Take care. So, folks, again, that was Cole Bolton. He is a rancher as well as a banker dealing with the finance side of this in Texas. Support their beef initiative at beefmaps.com. And we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to subscribe at Horowitz Show on YouTube if you're not already doing that. Daniel Horowitz at Substack. Till tomorrow, Micah 6'8". God bless you all, and thank you for listening.